But Hugo, I do want to ask you one thing. The reason the film looks so good is just because of the camera they used, right?
Oh, fuck's sake.
Is that true?
Yes, definitely. Yes. Like people say
The
on
only
YouTube,
reason.
Yes.
The only reason.
This is a commercial for Sony. That's the whole thing that people say. This film famously was shot with the Sony FX3. But yeah, people sometimes confuse technology with artistry, and I feel like it doesn't matter which camera you use. It doesn't really matter what equipment or software. You should be as agnostic as possible. And such a pointless discussion, such a pointless conversation.
Well, the nuance to it was sort of two things, wasn't it? The fact that it's a small camera and therefore accessible. And the other thing that happened with The Creator in terms of its marketing was it had quite a low budget, but looked like a much bigger film. And so suddenly the stories that were coming out, often from non-professionals, was, oh, well, you only need to shoot with this cheap, smaller camera to get that look. And of course, it's disrespectful to Oren and Greg and Gareth because it's not about the camera.
This podcast is brought to you by Backlight. Backlight Creative enhances the entire creative project lifecycle. For pre-production, there's Celtics. For scriptwriting, beatboards, shot lists, and planning. And Backlight Gem, a narrative design platform for games and VR. For post-production, we've got F-Track Studio to manage creative projects with custom pipelines and reviews with CineSync and F-Track Review for high-res, real-time media collaboration. To manage your assets, connect your own storage to Iconic, a scalable cloud-based media asset management platform. You can learn more at backlight.co. And now on to the show.
What I want you to do, Hugo, is to replace half of my head as I do this with a CG back. So when everyone's watching this, they will actually see a CG back of my head, right?
Sure.
Is that right?
Yeah. That's exactly what is going to happen. Yeah.
Awesome.
So this podcast will come out in about a few months, and we'll do the roto and everything.
We got budget for that, Hugo?
Yes, we do. Yes.
Hi everyone, Ian Fales here from Befores and Afters, and I'm joined by Hugo Guerra from Hugo's desk in his bunker.
Yes, as you can see, Ian is actually here. There's proof of that. Look, he's actually here. He's in the room. Just because last time people were saying, oh, was he in the room? We can't really tell that he's in the room.
It was just green screen last time.
It was well, maybe it's still a composite. You never know. You never know. Oh, okay. Well, anyway, it's great to have you here again.
Thanks, man. It's awesome to be here. Before we get started talking about Gareth Edwards The Creator, we want to make sure we give a big shout out to our sponsors, our Patreon supporters, and of course everyone who watches us on YouTube. Hugo, we wouldn't be able to do this podcast without those people, would we?
Absolutely not. Thank you so much for all the support the sponsor gives us to our podcast. And of course, the Patreon support every month is really invaluable for both the Patreon of Hugo's Desk and the Patreon of Before and Afters. And and thanks for all the love we get online. We always get so many lovely messages, sometimes private, sometimes public. There's always a lot of comments.
Why? What private messages are you getting?
No, people really like the show, and they do message me sometimes complaining that they wanted to hear the podcast on audio. So I keep saying this to everyone, that if people don't know, you can listen to this podcast as an audio format using the Google Music app. And it can be listened like a podcast on audio if you want to. So, but yeah, thank you so much for all the support. It's amazing.
Thanks, everyone. Amazing to be in London with you, Hugo. We're going to talk about Gareth Edwards, the creator, of course.
Yeah.
Probably, ultimately, one of the most influential visual effects films released last year from 2023. June 2 might have been that film, but of course it got delayed.
Yeah.
I feel like the creator just took the wind out of other films by being a different approach to visual effects, which we'll talk about. But before we get into the VFX stuff, what are your first impressions of the film, Hugo?
I absolutely love the film. I watched the film 3 times now. I love it. I mean, I've been a big fan of Gareth Edwards' work for a while, and I think his approach to filmmaking is just stunning. The film is fantastic. I think it's one of the best films about AI. probably since Ex Machina, and I think about this topic, and it really hits hard because we're now starting to have just the infants of AI, and with all the problems we're starting to have, and this is just moving forwards like 50 years into the future almost, and where we could see where things could end up. And so it's a quite dark film. It's a quite apocalyptic film, but also it has such a warmth message in its heart, you know, because it's also a very emotional film. I thought it was fantastic. I think the film is just, yeah, it's one of the best sci-fi films I've seen in years. I don't have any words to describe it even more. I think it's just fantastic. What do you think?
Well, it's interesting because it continues a bit of a trend that I think you and I have followed with some films, at least in this case for me with The Creator. I saw it the first time, thought visually it was brilliant, and then to hear about some of the visual effects work, also brilliant. But it wasn't until I saw it the second time, which was only via online, that I liked it even more. Some of my issues with the first time around were that I thought the AI side of things was fascinating, just a brilliant take on what could happen with artificial intelligence, especially America treating it like this and Asia treating it like that. Yeah. Brilliant. But I thought the film was trying really, really, really hard to have a very much, you know, father-daughter relationship thing going on that was central to the film, and I didn't feel it. Didn't feel the emotion of that Alfie and David Washington connection. When I saw it the second time, it just hits differently. Yeah. I don't know why. Yeah. It happened to us with this film Eternals, right?
Yeah,
we saw that once and we were like, saw it again. Oh, I see what the filmmakers are trying to do. Yeah. So AI stuff really interesting. Emotional character journey, probably not as interesting. And I reckon they were trying to make something a lot more deep and meaningful and didn't quite get there. But the second time around, it still works. Yeah. So that's my assessment.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I understand exactly what you mean. And I think we've discussed this privately as well already, where I think also, you know, we're not parents, we don't have kids. And I think maybe it hits differently as well for people that have daughters and have sons. And I think it does hit a bit different. But I've been fascinated by the film because the film has so many layers. I've now seen it 3 times and I keep noticing more and more things because there's an interesting part of this film is that it has so much story being told by the environments. Not only the newscasts, which tell a lot of the exposition of the film, also the cartoons as well, which are a really nice touch of showcasing the war between Asia and Western society and all of the war between the bad guys, which in fact are the Americans. And it's just a fascinating way of showcasing it without having too much exposition. I really don't like films that have too much explanation. And I think Gareth really, really hit a perfect blend of sharing just enough, especially that beginning, that little intro with what's happening to the world. And you're engaged on it and you're watching that the AI is coming in and the AI is coming in and then there's a few little problems and then suddenly a nuclear explosion explodes. It's really, really fast. So there's so much explanation on that little 20 seconds. And then you keep doing that with the newscast and then the cartoons. And also even by the environmental design of things, you know, how you see how they've mixed the old world with the new world. It's just such a story, a rich story film. So many layers to dig into. You know?
I agree with you. And it's also why it works second or third time, I think. The only thing is, there was a brilliant thing done with that Animatrix series. Do you remember the Wachowskis did that Animatrix one? And one of the episodes was about the AI battle.
Yeah, it's a very similar...
I always love that. And I think, to be honest, filmmakers might have borrowed from that. Or generally The Matrix is about that as well. And I sometimes think, I kind of wish that was a live action film, that prequel to the Matrix sequels by the Animatrix. But anyway, it still worked really well in The Creator.
No, and then maybe this explains also why the film didn't do as well, which I think it's a it's a shame. It's a real shame the film didn't broke more ground and more people didn't watch it. It's frustrating, you know, because people complain that there's no new thing to see and there's just Marvel and DC and superhero movies. And then when something fresh and something really creative comes along, people don't really jump into it. So I thought it was a shame that it wasn't as well received as I thought it was going to be. But and I have a theory that maybe it's the American thing that maybe didn't rub the people the wrong way, perhaps, you know, because it's not common that the United States is the villain, and they are definitely the villain on this film.
It's a bit anti-American.
Yes.
Do you remember a film a couple of years ago which was about Neil Armstrong, called First Man?
Oh yeah.
And in a way, it's a brilliant film with Ryan.
Yeah, it's amazing. That's also very good VFX.
Ryan.
Which one is that?
Sexiest Ryan on the planet. Why am I forgetting which Ryan this is? Anyway,
Ryan Gosling?
Ryan Gosling.
Yeah.
I love this film, right?
Yeah. We need to do an episode about that film.
But it also reinvents a little bit about the history of, you know, America's boy hero, Neil Armstrong, and has kind of some American stuff in it. And it didn't do very well.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's possible that this has
it goes
down a little bit.
I think it's that. Also, perhaps because the film with the name, the creator, maybe it didn't really. Although it's still better than the original name. Originally the film was supposed to be called True Love, which was going to become a problem. I think that would have become. Is this a romantic story? Is this like a rom-com? But I think that together with maybe the marketing wasn't too pushed. I feel sorry for the team and for Gareth, but because I think this film deserved much better. But aside of that, because films sometimes become much bigger later on, and I'm sure this film will be a cult film.
I'm convinced this is a film people will put on Disney Plus regularly.
Yeah,
I am just convinced. Now, part of that is AI is going to start infiltrating people's lives even more.
Exactly. I was more relevant.
Just on that thing about how well it did versus could have done. I was surprised it didn't do better because when it came out, we were all in on conversations about generative AI and the impact of AI. It's possible, therefore, we might have been already sick of AI a little bit. I actually think that's
could be,
possible.
And also, or also there. I think maybe when I watched the trailer the first time, didn't really connect with AI. I just thought about robots.
Sure.
You know, and I think there's this thing of that's something else. You know, robots are something different. I don't think. Only when you watch the movie you really truly understand what the story is. Yep. You don't really notice it by the trailer. I'm not no disrespect. The trailer is good, but I felt maybe the messaging wasn't on point. Yeah. But apart from that, like I feel like the film, you know, apart from all that environmental messaging, I felt that the acting was really strong as well. She's astonishing. The girl that plays the main character, Alfie. And she was only 7 years old when she did the movie. That's insane.
She's got something.
She's really talented, and you know she has emotional weight, and she cries in the movie on cue. It's just really powerful. And of course, Washington is also fantastic. I mean, I loved Tenet before with him. I think he's starting to become a really big cult actor as well. He's starting to really. Man, I don't know. Maybe he has a really good agent. He's really picking them.
He gets. Okay, I'm going to keep coming back to my criticisms of the film, but again, it's about watching it a couple of times. He got criticized, I think, in a few reviews, and he doesn't have much emotion in Tenet either.
Yeah.
But he's not an emotional actor.
No.
And here, I can see why he was cast. That's what he had to be for this to be a spy, to be a double agent sort of thing. It's perfectly cast. But I can also see how that created my first initial reaction to the film, which is, I don't want to cry at the end, right? Whereas I think that's what they were trying to do.
Yeah.
But anyway, I really do like David Washington, and I think it totally worked here. He, as a character, as casting for this character, it totally worked.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it's funny that you say that. I also don't think I felt like that the first time I saw the film, because I think I probably would have been. I was too distracted by the look of the film and the VFX, and the second time I watched it, I was more looking at the actual story and everything. And it really hit me more emotionally the second time. I actually even had moisty eyes when I watched the second time at the end, when all the ending ends up, and then there's like the whole thing. I don't want to spoil it. I mean, I hope people have watched the film, but for me, the proof that it has an emotional resonance is that the other day I was watching breakdowns of the film at the Visual Effects Society, and even just those little clips of the breakdown made me an emotional toll.
Really?
Even just watching that section. Because it was the section when he dies and when she's alone. Even just watching it a la carte almost gave me a little, that's how resonant it made to me now.
I'll tell you where I got emotional was more about the sensitivities of the Asian population helping robots and helping each other. There was something very nice about that.
Absolutely.
And it's meant to be like in contrast to America. Yeah. So that's the whole point of it. But that's where I was hoping the emotional part of the film would go. And of course, it's a film. They want to focus on characters. And so we end up with Alfie and her father and, mother.
Yeah.
And again, just to say it one more time, it didn't quite work for me the first time. It works the second time because you can concentrate on those characters and almost ignore some of the other stuff in the film.
Absolutely. And I it's great that you mentioned that about the emotional toll of the AI. I also felt that this was the first time I saw a film where you see not the good side of the AI, but actually, like you said, the Asian population is really takes them as it's almost like the relationship that some people have with animals these days, like where people like animals, or people become vegetarians, or they become vegans. Speaking as a vegetarian myself, and I felt that this film really made an amazing relationship of how spiritual the AI world was.
That's
how
perfect.
They were monks, and they were almost like they looked like monks, and they were praying with people, and they were taking care of the children, and they were like on the Tibetan temples. It's a fascinating way.
But I also think it's been written that way because there's a view that perhaps that part of the world is more in tune with their spiritual side.
Yeah, with nature.
They're in nature, they're animals.
Yeah.
And it's pretty blanket to say Americans are not.
No.
But they're brutal, like compared to parts of the rest of the world. And it is a comment on that,
Absolutely.
And so it's almost what you already feel about that part of the world.
Yeah.
So it reinforced it.
Absolutely. And I think Gareth did an amazing job there. I feel like the film really shines on that section, especially when they are being attacked, and then you see the robots protecting the children, and it's so funny. Even there's a shot on the film where a robot dies, and then the monkey picks up the trigger, and the monkey pulls the trigger. It's I know sometimes it's in your face, but it's so well written and so well constructed, and it's a really, really perfect criticism and perfect vision of what's happening quite now. I feel like some parts of the world, especially the United States, like you say, and also a lot of parts in Europe, are very disconnected from the world, and they're very disconnected from nature. That's why we're having so many problems with climate change. And I felt that, it's a shame the film didn't do better. But I think, like you said, I think digitally it will live a longer life, and it will be released soon. So,
can we talk a little bit about Gareth Edwards as a filmmaker? Yeah. People will know him, of course, from Rogue One and from Godzilla. Yeah. And visual effects people will be very aware, I think, of his indie film Monsters. Yeah. And even some of the work done before that, where he worked on some TV series and he was actually a visual effects artist and kind of basically did the work himself. Actually, he ran a course at FX PhD, where I used to work, which is still, I've been told, one of the most popular courses to watch. Even when it was put on for free, people were still like signing up to watch it. So clearly Gareth has this great understanding of visual effects, which has aided particularly Godzilla and Rogue One and this film. Absolutely. But I think there's a sensibility about his films that works so well for the creator, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
the general nature of that is you're an observer to this world. It's handheld. Yeah. It's a bit scrappy. It's a bit crappy almost. Yeah. I mean, actually, when we get down to the technology and how they made it, it's not crappy at all.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's almost like full circle from Monsters through Rogue One to Godzilla to Rogue One. It's almost like the creator is Monsters 2.0
absolutely.
In its nature.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. And I'm so happy that he actually went back to his roots, because this is what I want to see. I mean, no disrespect. I mean, Rogue One for me is my favorite Star Wars movie. Like, there's no questions asked.
So watchable.
Yeah,
it's so watchable.
Like, Gareth has made the best Star Wars movie. I agree. I'm sure I'm going to get heat from there, but I think he did a better Star Wars movie than even George Lucas did. I think that is the best Star Wars ever made, Rogue One. It's an amazing film, very resonant. It has a very emotional tone. And it's all based on a really small snippet of something that Luke Skywalker says with Han Solo. And it's so well constructed. And then, of course, Godzilla. I mean, it's not perfect, the film, but I think it's probably one of the best Godzillas ever made. I mean, it's really powerful. Even consider there's only 10 minutes where Godzilla shows up on the film. He's only there for 10 minutes.
It's very good, Godzilla, but it's one of those films where you could throw away the human actors and not care, and
exactly.
You'd still watch just the Godzilla. Yeah. What I'm trying to say is you don't need the actors.
Those are really, yeah, absolutely. Those are really powerful sections. Yeah. And so I'm very happy that he didn't do the same. Maybe I'm going to be wrong on the next film, but I'm happy that he's not one of those directors that started indie, goes to Hollywood, and then just does a shit ton of movies that no one cares and then never comes back. Yeah. And I'm happy that he's now, you can kind of see that he's built a reputation in Godzilla and Rogue One, and that opened a lot of doors for him, probably. And he managed to do The Creator. I hope Disney can support him next time as well, and I hope they do, because he's a super amazing director.
I obviously agree, but I do think people probably thought Rogue One underperformed, and that maybe he'd been pushed into some of these big films too early. I mean, it's a long time since Rogue One to The Creator. There's there's COVID, and there's development hell that happens with everything. But it did feel like he had to go away and go, okay, what kind of filmmaker do I want to be? Yeah, exactly. And he's come roaring back with The Creator, which we all wish more people saw. But I'm so happy, Gareth, you're making these films.
I mean, he's so young as well. He has a huge career in front of him, and I'm so happy to see a film like The Creator. I know what you mean. The Rogue One, it's the same thing with Solo as well. Everyone's saying, oh, those underperform. And yes, sure, they underperform if you put your bar to, oh yeah, this has to be $1 billion film. I know it has the weight of Star Wars, but the film still made a lot of money. And the film still made a lot of money.
Yes, it's probably I probably used the wrong word there.
I just think that they have way too many expectations on this. Like they go beyond, like they just want all the money in the world.
Let me clarify that. I don't think Rogue One did underperform.
No,
but there was a bit of hoo-ha when the film was made that Gareth was really making a bit of a run and gun production.
Exactly.
And at the end, they totally did bring in Tony Gilroy to do some rewriting. Yeah. And we've heard that they've changed the ending and all that sort of thing.
Absolutely.
Happens every film.
Absolutely.
I just feel that perhaps Gareth was a little bit burnt from the experience.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's the time that it's taken to make a film.
I think it was bad bad timing, because I don't think it was Gareth's fault that Star Wars underperformed on the eyes of Disney. I think the Star Wars property was already going down by then.
There were a lot of Star Wars films.
Yeah, exactly. And it was too many. And then Rogue One, and then Solo, and it just started going down and down and down and a down spiral. And I think now we know where that ended up. Like, with most people are like, there's not even a film coming out now, and there's nothing really scheduled, because
there are some. But anyway,
yeah. It's okay. but they are. No, I mean, it's like there was a cadence of having one per year.
Absolutely.
Like
it definitely
changed. Completely changed that entire mindset. But yeah, I'm glad that we talked about him. He's an amazing director for sure. Yeah. I can't wait to see what he does next. And take your time, Gareth. You do your thing.
There's something about his collaboration on this film The Creator that is important to talk about too, right? Which is with his DOPs.
Yeah.
And these are Greg Frasier, who we worked with on Rogue One.
Yeah.
And also Oren Sofer. Sorry, Oren, if I'm mispronouncing your name there. But really interestingly, there's something that he did with Greg on Rogue One, which was keep it very much handheld and, a bit more, as I say, run and gun. That clearly comes into The Creator as well. And Greg's had all this experience as well with the volume and ILM stagecraft, but Greg's not exclusively that kind of filmmaker. He's obviously done Dune, which doesn't famously use the volume.
And a lot of parts of the Batman as well don't use the volume. Not all of it is in volume. Absolutely. His career has been. And one of my favorites from him, Foxcatcher, looks absolutely stunning. And we talked about Greg before on the Batman, and both Foxcatcher looks stunning, and Zero Dark 30 also looks stunning. I think he has a unique style and a unique look to his films. And you can kind of tell that on The Creator. The Creator resembles more Foxcatcher and Zero Dark 30 than it resembles Dune and the Batman. I think it's a much different film and a much more realistic film. That's the thing that it has. It almost feels like you're watching real life. You're watching a documentary of someone being there on these locations, which is amazing.
And I don't know the long history as to why there are two DOPs. I expect it's because Greg had to go off and make
that's exactly
Dune
what happened.
2 or other
that's
films.
Exactly. I would recommend people. I know I keep thinking that this is an advertisement for American Cinematography, but it is not. There's a really good article on the American Cinematography of November about the film, and it explains all of that. It's exactly because both, it was not just Dune, but also the COVID restrictions. So sometimes Greg couldn't go and come back to Thailand because of COVID restrictions and because of the schedule of Dune. So sometimes he had to do it remotely, and that's where Oren kind of stepped in and worked as a team to a point that then later on, because of COVID and because of Dune, Greg ended up not being in the film as much as he thought he was going to be. So, and also it has to do with the fact that Gareth and Greg kind of like made a different style for this film. We're going to talk about that in a minute, but very differently this time. Gareth was his own camera operator, so they didn't have a camera operator in the film. Gareth actually filmed the majority of the film, not all the film, but the majority of the film was filmed run and gun by Gareth himself. So I'm not saying that all DOPs usually operate the camera. Not all of them do. Sometimes there's a camera operator, but sometimes DOPs do operate the camera. Greg does operate this camera. I've seen him on behind the scenes, but I think the nature of how Gareth Edwards works would be difficult to have a camera operator. I don't think it fits in to his style of filming, Because he's going to tell someone else to do that? It's a bit strange.
I'm not sure I totally get the machinations of how it works in Hollywood or anywhere in terms of...
You
hear about Jim Cameron taking the camera away.
It's mostly because of the unions, really.
Oh, totally.
That's the problem.
But I meant in terms of people's personal preference,
I don't understand either. I wish I could always use the camera myself, but I'm sometimes not allowed to, or a lot of directors are not allowed to. And on this situation, I think they didn't have a chance because this was supposed to be a run and gun guerrilla style shoot. But
one quick thing is I totally recommend everyone here follow Greg and Oren on their Instagram pages. They're constantly posting great little insights, links to their own chats, links to stories. It's really nice when these are big cinematographers, and you kind of feel like they're making it a bit more accessible by having access to their stuff. And, also, as I understand it, Oren was recently at the Bake Off for The Creator to support the team, which is kind of nice as well. So big shout out to those DOPs.
Yeah, absolutely.
But Hugo, I do want to ask you one thing. The reason the film looks so good is just because of the camera they used, right?
Oh, my sake.
Is that true?
Yes, definitely. Yes. Like people say
the
on
only
YouTube,
reason.
Yes,
the only reason.
This is a commercial for Sony. That's the whole thing that people say. Yeah, I know. There's a lot of conversation about that, especially at the time. This film famously was shot with the Sony FX3. really tiny camera, really tiny full frame camera. But yeah, people sometimes confuse technology with artistry, and I feel like it doesn't matter which camera you use. It doesn't really matter what equipment or software. You should be as agnostic as possible. And I find it fascinating that there's so many YouTube videos and so many articles about the fact of saying, oh my God, the Sony FX3 has destroyed Hollywood. Hollywood is never going to be the same and this and that. It's just like such a pointless discussion, such a pointless conversation.
Well, the nuance to it was sort of two things, wasn't it? The fact that it's a small camera and therefore accessible, and I don't know if it's cheap or not, probably not. But
it is cheap. It's $5,000.
Right.
It is a very cheap camera for cinema.
Yes, because the other thing that happened with the Creator in terms of its marketing was it had quite a low budget, but looked like a much bigger film. And so suddenly the stories that were coming out, often from non-professionals, was, oh, well, you only need to shoot with this cheap, smaller camera to get that look. And of course, it's disrespectful to Oren and Greg and Gareth because it's not about the camera.
Not about the camera at all. And I mean, this is a good, man, don't get me wrong, it's a very good camera. It's a very good camera. I've used it before. It's a full frame camera, really tiny, has a lot of settings, but it is a camera that becomes a problem as well because it doesn't have gen sync so that you can connect it to time code on a set. So it's not a completely professional camera. So it's like a semi-professional camera. It wasn't really built to do a film. But I think the reason why they really go into detail on that on the American Cinematography interview. The reason they got it was they actually, both him and Greg Frasier, chopped around quite a lot and looked at a lot of cameras. You know, they were trying to find something that would fit the running gun nature. And there's a couple of things. First of all, the camera is really, really tiny, so they can put it on the backpack and they can travel the world with the backpack and just have the camera with him all times without going to customs, without having it under the plane could be on the carry-on, you know.
And the reason that's important is because they shot in like 12 different countries.
Yes,
right?
There's 80 locations on this film and it's 8 different countries. So they had to travel a lot and it had to be light. So that's reason number one why they picked it. Reason number two, of course, it's a full frame camera. So that means you have the full spectrum of the lens and you can have actually the resolution enough to be on the cinema. In this case for IMAX, although it's not an IMAX camera, okay? Just wanted to be clear. But it's formatted to IMAX. It has enough resolution to kind of pull it off. And the two other reasons was the very high ISO ratio. So Sony has always been very good at this. So this camera, normally cinema cameras are usually with an ISO of 800. So that's the sensibility to light. And 800 native ISO requires quite a lot of lighting and it requires a lot of equipment. And if you go above 800, so if you go to 1600 or if you go to 3200 or even if you go to 10,000 ISO, you start to get a lot of grain. Sony managed to kind of pull off a smaller sensor that has a better ratio of noise. And so they actually managed to pull off 12,000 ISO on the film. So literally could shoot with no lights outside, nighttime. So there's several parts of the film at nighttime that you can see that. And the noise is not too bad. Of course, I'm sure they denoised it a little bit. So that's another reason why they picked that camera. And then the last reason, the really important reason why they picked this camera is that this camera allows you to be incognito because it looks like a photography camera. It looks exactly like a DSLR. And so when anyone looking at you, they think you're a tourist taking pictures. And that's a really big factor here because he can be so incognito that he can grab little hints of the locations and he can really grab people when they're not noticing and they don't have because a lot of the film is shot with real people from the locations. These are not actors, they're not professionals. They might be intimidated with like a huge camera with like a lot of things, but if it's like a small DSLR, they're probably used to it, you know. So it makes sense for them to pick this camera, you know.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because again, we're talking about Gareth going back to his roots. But do you think like that's what every filmmaker wants, is to make it a bit more simple.
Yeah.
You know, I've been on a few film sets. You clearly have shot commercials and other big productions that use all the lights and all the tech. And it's important sometimes because it gives you daytime exterior that you can't get because you can't shoot in sunlight. So you need all this stuff. Yeah. But I just wonder whether some filmmakers just get a bit tired.
They do.
Of just
because it slows down. Yeah. It slows down everything. Yeah. It does slow down. Now, I must say, a lot of people, as much as people think the film was all shot on a Sony FX3, it wasn't. There are a lot of parts of the film that were shot with the other Sony, a more regular cinema camera, which is similar to an Alexa, much bigger camera, which is the Sony FX9. But that's just because of the Genlock system to sync with timecode so that they could do the volume. Because on the volume, your camera has to be timecode synced with the screens. So unfortunately, the FX3 doesn't do that. And so they couldn't use the FX3 for that. And also for the drone shots, they used the DJI Mavic 2 drone. So there's other parts of the film done with other cameras, but the majority of the film was this tiny camera. But going back to what you just said about filmmakers wanting to go that, of course we want that, because it is the freedom of just being with an actor and filming. And a lot of productions these days are bloated. What happens is 3 trucks come in, and you have the truck filled with tripods, and then filled with C-stands, filled with lights. And it's what they say, the just-in-case van. In case we need, we have the lights here. In case we need the C-stands, we have them here. And what happens? 90% of the time, you never even touch the van. And the problem with the van is then the van brings 10 more people. And then there's another person to assist with the lights, and then there's another so by bringing a van, then you bring 3 more people, and then you bring a second van, and there's 3 more people. By the time you look, you have 5 vans, you already have 25 people on set that are not doing anything. They're just there in case someone needs to go to the van. And this is a bloated system, and I'm not saying all films need to be done that way. Of course, if you're in the studio, you have the space to have the bloat. But if you're gonna be trekking over the world on 80 locations, how the hell are you going to bring hundreds of people with you? You're not.
And obviously it's a pitch as well to the studio to save costs. And in this case, it was 20th Century, which, you know, is part of Disney, but is its own thing now after the Fox merger or takeover. So I just assume that the budget was never going to be $200 million anyway, even if it looks like that kind of film. So yes, it seems like all the obvious reasons were there to go smaller, have less crew, but also it just suits Gareth's style anyway.
It suits this film, for sure.
And suits the film, frankly,
And there's also another, obviously the most famous director that used to do this was Kubrick. Kubrick used to do this all the time. He would come to Warner Bros. And tell them, okay, so I need 100, I had, like, in today's money, I need 100 million, let's say. But instead of 200 million, I need this money, but instead of shooting for a month, we're going to shoot for 6 months. So we'll have a third of the crew, but I want it for longer. And that's how he did Eyes Wide Shut. He had a really tiny crew for a year. And that actually ended up costing less than having a gigantic bloated crew for 3 months. And so this method...
With Eyes Wide Shut, it did take a lot longer than
but that's because, it took longer. But I'm just giving you an example because the cool thing about Gareth's style is that removing the just-in-case stuff that is on the vans allows you to also have a different approach to filmmaking. Because if you have limitations, okay, if you go to a set and you don't have a dolly, you don't have a jib, you don't have a Steadicam, you then work with what you have. And so then you develop creative choices to work with what you have. And I personally feel, and maybe Gareth feels that way as well, I personally feel that usually drives creativity on a project when you're having limitations. And limitations allows you to think and troubleshoot, and then you come up with other ideas of doing it.
Well, I'll add to that he definitely invented shots, it feels like, during the production. But also, the production went into it knowing that they would do visual effects design afterwards. Now, there's plenty of visual effects concept work done and design and discussions done earlier. But this is a bit of a landmark side of this film, which is,
absolutely.
and we'll get to it more in detail in a minute, but it was, you know, usually with visual effects, you've got to pre-plan so much that you're almost locked into the shots, i.e. you previous things heavily, you board heavily. It just feels like Gareth didn't do that here, but he would shoot things and find shots knowing that he could develop the visual effects later. It just changed them. It seems to have changed the mindset of all the filmmakers.
Absolutely, because you know, on a real shoot, if let's say we're gonna go to the village and we have 3 shots to do there. If you prepare everything, we're gonna bring the van, we're gonna put the C-stands, we're gonna put the lights, we're gonna put this. By the time you're starting to shoot, it's like 2 hours later. And this is a different aspect. He has it on his bag. It's a small camera. Greg Frasier talks about that on interviews, that Gareth didn't use a viewfinder. He actually used the camera to line up the actual camera. And then he is using really old school lenses, by the way. So he's using anamorphic lenses called Koya Cine Pro Minar, and also he had Atlas Mercury shots as well, lenses. And some of these are from the Soviet Union. They're really old lenses that would have been rehoused to operate on this camera. But the funny thing as well is that the majority of the film was shot with a 75mm, a single lens. And then, of course, he also used the 42 for interiors and some zooms here and there. And, of course, the drone was different. But the fact that he picked 1mm, one field of view for almost the entire film allowed him to just be run and gun, because the lens would always be attached to the camera. He would put it out of his bag, he would rig it, and he would just start shooting. And then he would have these long takes and shoot and shoot and shoot and shoot, and then go to the next location. So you don't have to let's try the 45, let's try the 25, let's try another lens, let's try the zoom, There's none of that. It's just like, it's a super economical way of shooting, but also a highly creative, man, this is coming from a person that definitely knows what he's doing. That's the thing. That's what I wanted to say at the end, because this is an economical, it's so economical that can only come from a mind of a person that knows exactly what he wants.
Yeah.
You know, he knows what he wants. He has it all in his mind. There's no storyboard. There's no animatic. He knows. He looks around and it's going to be there. Oh yeah, that shot's going to be there. Yeah, this person can be here. And that's really strong. That's really amazing. And
pretty
you feel
scary.
that on the film.
I'd be pretty scared.
I know, as an executive,
as a producer
yes.
or something like that.
It would be super scary, of course. Because this is an independent method of doing a film.
Yeah.
It's like a short film or like a student film is done like that. You know?
But I suppose if you think about a documentary, you don't really know necessarily what shots you're going to get either.
You just know.
And yet you do aim to get the best shots.
Yeah.
There's something you could say about the creator and that approach as well.
Absolutely.
You know, they're all consummate filmmakers. They know what they can do.
Absolutely.
In this case, they also had the benefit of incredible Asian locations.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that for a minute. I mean, where did they go? Japan, Nepal, Indonesia, Cambodia, Thailand, Vietnam, probably a few other places.
Yeah, 6 months of traveling all around the world. And this is really well timed, right after COVID finishes. And so people were still scared to go to these countries because COVID just opened the lockdown. And he came in when both the people over there were really happy to get people, and so they were very helpful because they were so happy to have tourists. And then also because the tourists didn't come in yet, because people were still scared to travel, he probably got these locations really empty as well, which was perfect for him to shoot this, you know. And so I feel like I'm really impressed by what he's achieved here, and I wish there was more. I can't wait to see the Blu-ray. I pre-ordered the Blu-ray. The Blu-ray is going to be out in a couple of weeks. It's supposed to have hours of behind the scenes. I really hope it has some cool stuff, because I really want to see all this thing and how they shot it and how they did it, because it's scary. I know what you mean. It's scary to do something like this, but if you have a director and a DOP and a crew that knows what they're trying to achieve, I think it's achievable, and you can kind of tell that they really, and you feel that on the film. You feel that the film, sometimes it feels like you're seeing this for the first time. It's almost like a secret. You're seeing something that no one has seen, and there's a magical side of the film because you feel that it's been shot very organically. you kind of feel that on the film, just like a documentary, you know.
It feels like a documentary, but it's much more exciting than a documentary. Yeah. And so, Hugo, one of the things that happened when this film was being promoted was that they really did push the visual effects quite a lot. In fact, it might have even impacted my original assessment of the film, in that I felt like, in some ways, ILM was pushing the film more than 20th Century or Disney. And I don't know if that is true or what the story behind that was, but by the way, the visual effects are incredible. So that might have been the reason.
Absolutely incredible. It's seamless. Completely seamless.
We'll talk about the approach in a second, but basically ILM, one of those films where they, were the main vendor and basically took control of the film. It's an onset VFX soup, Andrew Roberts. Jay Cooper was ILM's visual effects supervisor. Other amazing supervision by Ian Comley and Charmaine Chen. Got to talk to Ian and Charmaine for a story at beforesandafters.com when they were at the View conference in Turin. And there's lots of great little tidbits in there about things they had to do. What happens on these big films, though, of course, is that ILM then outsources a bunch of its work to big studios, to amazing studios. Like Finn and Outpost and Crafty Apes, Jellyfish. There's a whole heap of
they're all studios. The credits is humongous. All of these are on the studio on the credits, and you have also Outpost, you have Jellyfish, you have Proof, you have Territory Studio, Atomic Art. There's I think it's 10 or 12 studios that were involved in the project, and I don't know the shot number, but it must have been thousands because literally almost every shot has something.
But what makes this film different, I think, is that in some ways it's more of a kickback to what used to happen in the 90s with digital visual effects filmmaking, which is we're not going to necessarily be able to get a LiDAR scan of the location, clean plates, green screen. It's much more, as we kept saying, guerrilla work. Therefore, it's much more handheld match move, handheld match move, hand match move, hand roto, than maybe what we've got used to with some of these bigger films. Absolutely. Literally, the headline of my article is a quote from one of the Ian or Charmaine saying, it was literally shoot, here's the plate, make it work, go. But I think you can feel that, right? When you're watching a film.
Yeah, you can. You absolutely can. And I feel like, of course, these days, people have to understand that we reached the point in visual effects where, I'm not saying things are easy, but what I meant is things are much easier than they were on the 90s, okay? In the 90s, if you had a running gun film and then you go to ILM and said, okay, we need 200 shots here, they would probably just tell you to bugger off. They would tell you, we can't do this. It's millions of dollars. Why? Because the silicon graphic would cost $1 million. Then the software would cost $1 million. Then the people would be booked thousands of pounds per day. The whole thing is so expensive. You could never do this. But now, off the shelf, you have Sentai's to track, which is amazing. Nuke to composite, which is really much cheaper than those softwares used to be. You have Fusion, which is free. DaVinci, which is free. You have Maya, which is much more affordable these days. You have Blender, which is actually free. You have all these things now available, which makes the entry level much easier. And also, tracking a shot these days, you can literally, the softwares are so advanced now that you hardly need a marker, you hardly need anything, and if you have a talented artist behind it, you can kind of pull anything.
Yes, really. I agree with you, except that we're talking here as well about using brute force. So they do throw a lot of artists at it.
Absolutely.
Whereas maybe we're thinking, not that they don't throw artists at other shows, but maybe we're thinking there's a lot more data captured or surveyed to make the visual effects process easier down the road.
I'm not saying, I do think that HDRs are very welcome and LiDAR scans are very welcome, but they would not work for a film like this. No. You just don't have time to do HDRs and LiDARs because you're jumping around from location to location. The organic nature of this film doesn't really allow that, but if you start thinking about it, like if you are very tight with what you shoot, and then you're very tight on the edit, and you know exactly what you want, and then you send it to ILM, and maybe potentially you know that that's the shot you want, there's not much of backwards and forwards, and we know we need to do the shot like that because the plate is there. There's nothing else. That's the plate. That's what we need to do. I think it kind of constructs an environment where we all know what we need to achieve. That's the plate we have. We just have to match it. There's no guesswork. Because, you know, if it was a green screen, a lot of guesswork. If it was a blue screen, they would have to then invent what's going to be there. Yes. And in here, they already have something.
The natural environments that they shot in. By the way, there's plenty of full CG shots in the film too.
Yeah, of course.
But the natural environments, they're what you're doing, you know. And often we're talking about when they're replacing a person with a full robot, or replacing part of a human with metallic robot pieces. That's where maybe on another bigger film there'd be scanning of those actors, lots and lots of data captured. There was a lot of data captured for this film. We don't want to make out that someone didn't do all that work, but it wasn't the same kind of approach that I think we've got used to on these bigger films. What that meant simply was that ILM and its vendor partners had to go back to like more old school, as we say, hand techniques, which isn't true at all. They're clearly using the software that you've mentioned to do it. And in some ways, you could argue it made the visual effects look better because it's a bit more raw, you know. And what are we talking about here, like with a real example, is like that joke we made at the beginning with me moving my head. You can see through the characters' heads, basically. And what would you normally do? Shoot a clean plate, get all the data and whatever else. In this case, as I understand it, ILM and its partners had to do much more clean plating, as in making fake clean plates, right?
By compositing methods, compositing and projections, and there's nothing wrong with that, and it does work. That's what I meant on the beginning. Technology has reached a point that you can actually pull off those kind of shots more easily than you used to. That's the problem. Like last time, before, you wouldn't really be able to do certain things. It would have been impossible. And now, you know, render engines are so realistic, and tracking softwares are so accurate that you can kind of pull off stuff like this. That's why. And also, like, the other side of this is the creative side. I also feel that if you shoot something with a bunch of actors, and you're shooting it with a bunch of actors, and no one really knows who will be the robot, no one will know, that means you'll get a very natural performance because no one knows that they're robots.
They're not trying to do a robot performance or anything like that.
And I think that's genius. I really think that's a genius take, because then they get the actual, of course, poor actors, some of them never show up on the film. I understand that. They probably were surprised when they got to the premiere and, oh shit, that was me.
There's my body, but that's it.
But I felt like you really feel the personality of the, you know what I mean? Like some of the robots are just like a round head and there's nothing. And you feel that there's a tension on it by the voice and by the movements of the heads. And it's fascinating how much you feel from them.
I would love to have been a fly on the wall in a Gareth spotting session. That's probably editorial, of where he's like, right, that character on the top left, that's like going to be a robot. That's not going to be. And then I would love to be a fly on the wall for like a visual effects daily session, where Gareth says, oh, actually, you've gone and tracked that character, match moved him, but I want that one to be the robot instead. Because surely that could happen as well.
I'm sure that happened.
A lot of, this was made a big deal of, this fact that they didn't know who would be a robot or a simulant until post-production. Very similarly, as I understand it, they didn't do too much designing of vast environments until post-production. So they might have gone and shot a plate in Thailand of cars traveling along a roadway, and only then, once they had that plate, did production designer James Klein, who's actually used to work at ILM, would get involved and put like a massive factory in the background.
Well, he worked with Edwards on Rogue One as well.
So that's a very different. I mean, there's plenty of post-design work done in visual effects all the time, and art direction. This is why there are visual effects art directors. But this was sort of unusual in that there wasn't so much pre-design work, and it's much more done in post, partly because Gareth would shoot knowing that would happen, but also because then you can make decisions later. And we often say, oh, isn't it bad to make decisions later? But when you're in the hands of a VFX professional like Gareth or ILM, it's okay.
It's going to be okay. And it's the older technique, but I also think there's a revival going back to that. It's always been my favorite way of working, which is called the paint over, where you have an actual plate and then you paint over things to just come up with a design and then go to CG. And I find that that's a very typical way of working in commercials. Like I used to do that a lot when I was at the mill. We used to do that a lot at the time, where we would get frames from CG or even the plates that we shot, and then we would paint over things, do like some highlights, do this, and then go back to CG to develop it again. And I feel like this is a very organic and very artistic methodology of working, instead of starting from scratch. Because starting from scratch is difficult, because then you are going to be attached to a specific style, or you're going to be taking months and months to try to come up to the stage where they are ready. You know, because if they already have a plate to, like if they shot something in Japan that already looks kind of futuristic already, then you just have to add a few things to make it more realistic. And I would really like, I don't know if people are into it, but this is a quite nice book. Like this, of course, this book is funny because usually these books are about the art of later, afterwards. But this one is quite interesting because it has a lot of concepts that came after the shoot. You know, so I really recommend people to check it out.
Yes, and of course, as I've been talking to some of the filmmakers and visual effects people involved, I want to make it clear that they didn't only use those techniques, like go and shoot the film, then think about the visual effects. Because there was a VFX onset soup, ILM's involved from the beginning.
You don't want to make it sound like that.
Because, Hugo, there are scenes in the film, say when Alfie is interacting with that bomb robot on the bridge. During filming, they absolutely had a stand-in performer for that. And, you know, they've used classic techniques as well. We'll get to the LED wall stagecraft filmmaking. That are, you know, techniques of big, huge films. It's just that Gareth is using all of them, you know, together, and I really, really am impressed by that. I want to talk about that, actually, that village attack, you know, when those huge craft attacking the village.
With a huge explosion.
And it's a bit like what you were saying. What they really did there was build up a series of plates that they could use. You know, there was a real bridge, but they're going to blow it up, so they're not going to blow up the real bridge. ILM builds a bridge that it can simulate. They were going to knock over these stilted houses, well, with those big tank-like craft. By the way, how cool are those tanks? Oh my God, I wish I had one, you know, as a model. But they're simulations from ILM with amazing rigid body stuff and explosions. When I first saw the film, I was convinced, like absolutely convinced, that maybe 3210, rest in peace, had shot some miniature elements, you know, that were used for the tanks hitting those stilted houses. But it's fully CG.
It's all CG. It's all CG. It's so seamless that it's unbelievable how seamless it is. And it's seamless because they have the plate there. There's no going backwards. Like if it was a full CG shot, it would have been a bit more difficult to capture that realistic feeling to it. But because they have the plate there, they can then get the tank and all those houses to match everything that is there. But there's an entire side of the film, of course, every time there's a robot there, it's full CG as well.
Oh, yeah.
Very realistic. And then there's this arm and the leg and like... There's so much, and then the environments and streets and all the vehicles.
Yes.
All the vehicles are CG as well.
And we're going back to the cinematography here. Why it feels so realistic isn't just the beautiful photoreal rendering and compositing. It's that the camera movement is natural.
Yeah.
So you don't, like, I feel like as an audience member, you're like, oh, well, they didn't just motion capture that or have it on a, you know, have a totally locked off camera or anything like that. Like they didn't have to hide any of those techniques because they decided to be naturalistic
Yeah.
in the filming, but also in the visual effects approach too. So yeah.
Absolutely.
Visual effects wise, I thought it was also really successful in terms of wide vista environments, especially that huge, ridiculous nomad spacecraft.
Looks like a bomber. It's really. I mean, I'm sure it's not in purpose. It really reminds you of the big Second World War bombers, especially the atomic bomb, the B-52s, and it's definitely inspired by that.
Yeah, and I just really love the shot design there, where it just feels imposing, especially its laser scanning
it's like
kind
a
of thing.
shard, and it's a beautiful piece of design.
Now we saw some behind the scenes.
And there's that laser with the that sound. Oh my God, the sound design is just stunning. Really helps that thing because you see the projection of the laser on the grass, and it's just beautiful.
And again, with some of the techniques, we're saying Gareth is using very different techniques here. He went back to his Rogue One roots and did some virtual camera scouting for those shots. So we say no previs, but that is a form of...
because of course he couldn't go and shoot it on the space. If he could, I'm sure he would. But and you're talking about the space station, all the shots on the Nomad upstairs when
shots
he was
on the Nomad and
when he's on the
wide
missiles
shots.
and he's on the wide shots.
I feel like Gareth got very good at those for Rogue One, and ILM had only just implemented some VCam techniques for that back then. So he was using that in ILM's mocap stage, I think, to do that. That should lead us a little bit, Hugo, to talk about some of the stagecraft volume work for up in the Nomad, right?
Yeah, it does. I must say, like, I don't want to. I hope that no one gets thinks that I'm disrespecting. I thought that section feels a bit off compared to not off, but I mean it doesn't have the same look at the rest of the film. And that
doesn't have the same look.
No, because maybe it's because in space, maybe it's because it's outside, and maybe it's very clinical, and that's normal because space is clinical. But the rug and gun guerrilla style look of the entire film kind of doesn't feel the same when we are on this space station. And I understand why, because the camera has to be outside, but it starts to become a bit unrealistic, and you start noticing more of the CG because of that. And I think it's because my mind starts thinking, oh, he couldn't be there filming. And the rest of the film, you know that there's definitely one person there in the floor filming someone.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
However,
not saying the work is bad, it's not. It's amazing.
I'm going to split it into two parts. Some of the shots of Alfie up there operating the gate, the door, which have seemed like real-time rendered images, or at least, during filming was real-time stagecraft stuff. And a few of David Washington, being manipulated by that spidery tentacle creature, filmed with the volume in mind, really work. Like, partly because I've seen some great B-roll, it's just nice to know how they did it.
Yeah.
I think they looks okay. Looks fine. The bit I don't like of that sequence is the tentacled creature.
Yeah.
As a story point, it feels like they invented a climax, trying to invent an exciting climax. Yeah. And where the hell did this tentacled creature come from?
I know.
I would have liked to have seen it sort of like, what's the word? Foreshadowed. Yeah. A bit more.
It's off. It doesn't belong to
But the look of it, I'm okay with.
It's off. Maybe that's what I'm reacting, because it's completely off to the story. It's almost like they could have done the same with maybe troops coming in, or maybe police, because the entire film they're hunted by police, and then they're hunted by the American soldiers. Yeah. And then I kind of felt, on the space station, I'm sure the American soldiers are going to come in with breathing apparatus, and they're going to go there. But then we have this tentacle thing, which looks very good, yes, but it's completely... And also it's weird, because they are the ones that are against AI, but then they have something that looks like an AI.
I think the suggestion maybe is that they haven't not been using AI. They've been using AI the whole time. Yeah. I just thought it was those classic moments that we sometimes rally against on this podcast, where they need a big third act climax. And maybe they just thought it would be fun and crazy and silly if a creature appeared that could do this. I mean, it's not a creature; it's controlled by
someone else. Yeah. But I know what you mean. I kind of felt that it would have been better if it was a bunch of troops trying to assault the thing, and then maybe he would have been shot or something, and then he would die, and then the girl would escape. That probably could have worked.
Yeah. But I wonder...
But who am I? Like, who the fuck are we?
I wonder whether... I also think some of those scenes, particularly with Alfie in the volume, work really well, because as a 7-8-year-old kid with a volume, actually seeing what's around you, like, I just wonder whether that actually helped enormously than just acting against a blue screen.
Yeah.
Right? So it actually is like a totally amazing use case for child actors and I assume a first-time actor.
Well, it's funny that you say that. Actually, there's this really good Zoom call with all the VFX soups, the effects soup as well, and also Gareth Edwards on the Disney For Your Consideration website. That they talk about that, the VFX soups on ILM, and Gareth also talks about that. That was actually I forgot to mention that. That was actually one of the decisions why they didn't want to have mocap suits on set, and they didn't want to have a lot of tracking markers or the typical suits that they use, and they just would prefer to have regular people there, and then they would turn them to robots later because of the child actor, because it would have been very confusing for the child to see markers and see these gray suits and see spheres, and it would have just confused them, and then and I think also that's maybe why the child looks so naturalistic, because she's actually acting with regular people. Like there's no one else there. It's just regular dudes and girls, and which is really a funny thing. I'm not saying I'm sure it's not just because of that, but that's also another reason why they did it.
Well, and also ILM is at its peak in terms of stagecraft and volume work. They can deliver. We've had a chat, Hugo, on other episodes where we've heard on the grapevine that these LED volumes haven't actually been as fantastic or as useful, and certainly have been replaced. But I think ILM is sometimes in a different league.
Level.
They've been doing it since Mandalorian, if not before. And and again, Gareth has had that lineage with ILM since Rogue One as well. So, I just want to add one little fun extra visual effects tidbit that I got from Charmaine and Ian in my interview. That there was showing on their presentation at View Conference these befores and afters of often simulant work, which was much more about a human actor replaced with bits of robot or a hole in the head, and there was kind of, as you say, Hugo, were shots of like just a character, like a person, like smoking or on a motorbike. And then it was like the before plate was simply a motorbike in Thailand on a road. And then the after plate was a robot on a motorbike in Thailand. But like an old motorbike and stuff like that. Yeah. And I was like, wow, these befores and afters were great. What were they? And they were actually proof of concepts. Yeah. And my favorite thing about them was that I went, and Ian and Charmaine, were you involved in supervising those? And they said, no, that was John Knoll. And of course, John Knoll worked with Gareth on Rogue One and is the person behind the story of Rogue One too.
Yeah, he's the writer.
So you must feel pretty good if your proof of concept VFX supervisor is John Knoll from ILM.
You saw those at the View, wasn't it? The View Conference, the footage, the actual. I haven't seen those yet. I would love to see those.
Oh well, actually, you'll put them in this video because 20th Century. I kind of hate those long, thin portrait.
The videos they made. They've released them. That's right, on shorts on YouTube.
On shorts. I kind of hate those, although
they've released
things on shorts.
But they've released them now. I know what you mean.
And they're not the final. They're not in the film. They're like the proof of concept.
Yeah, that's cool. There you go. That's cool. That's right. I forgot about that. Yeah, so I did see them, but you saw them in full screen, I guess.
Yes, they looked amazing actually. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. This is a very good film. I just feel like people need to watch it. People need to support it. Okay, so if everyone here went to see it to the cinema, please do support it digitally. Buy the digital version or buy the Blu-ray, because there's going to have a lot of behind the scenes. Buy the DVD. Buy anything. I bought the 4K Blu-ray because we need to support filmmakers that are doing stuff like that. I just feel like I want to see more Gareth Edwards. I want to see more films like this.
Me too.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to reflect one more time. on my initial reaction to the film, and you did bring it up right at the beginning with its original title, True Love. I do think The Creator is not the best title for this film.
No, it's not.
It doesn't, even by the end of the film, it doesn't really necessarily give you the oomph of the film.
Especially like Narmata, which is the creator, she's not even in it that much. So it's like not even, you don't even see what she did.
Yeah.
You don't even know what she actually did. And I know Gareth was also toying around with the fact that maybe the film could be called Narmata as well. I think that would have been maybe cooler, but probably even worse.
Harder to market as what is this film about.
Exactly.
Look,
but you notice you notice on these big the film has chapters. You see these names that says Mother, and on the corner it says Narmata, and then it says alternative title on the other side.
Oh yes.
Yeah, it says Narmata on the bottom. So he put them there, and it says Alt on the other side. Like so. So it is quite funny, but
it's an amazing watch, and one that I think will pick up at home even more than it did.
Cinematography is definitely going to be nominated, I'm sure, and also the music is amazing as well. Hans Zimmer did an amazing job. I talked about this with you with Poor Things. That this soundtrack is another soundtrack that I actually listen to on a regular basis while preparing to this podcast, and it is a really subdued and it's a really. It's an Hans Zimmer soundtrack, you notice that, but it's so much more subtle than what he usually does. And it has a lot of heart on it. I really like the soundtrack. I thought it was a really beautiful soundtrack.
Me too. So. I could probably listen to it while I'm working.
Yeah.
And I don't always say that about many soundtracks these days, to be honest with you. It's that kind of music. It's subtle, which is the best bit of it, because... Again, we're comparing it a lot with other sci-fi films. It could easily have been...
And Zimmer is usually sometimes a bit... He goes all in sometimes.
So it's nice and subtle.
He goes all in. Funnily enough, this is just like a little fun thing that I've noticed while researching to this film. Funnily enough, there was a time that Gareth was trying to do the music on using an AI instead of actually hiring Hans Zimmer. And the funny thing about this is that Gareth actually went all the way to get this company that did music and AI and actually told the company, I wanted to sound like Hans Zimmer. And then they produced soundtrack that was actually quite Hans Zimmer-like. He was actually quite impressed by that. But then they ended up, I'm so glad he gave up on that and ended up actually going with the real deal with Hans Zimmer.
That's interesting, because I reckon if he'd done it with that AI solution, there would have been pushback from Hollywood and audience members. In the same way, I remember asking the ILM team, did you use any AI tools for this in particular, given the nature of the story? And, apart from possibly the classic roto tracking AI
machine learning
and they have other tools ILM's been developing. They said no. It wasn't, because it was more of an old school approach.
Yeah.
And again, if they had, I think they would teeter on the edge of, do we promote this as using AI tools, or do we make sure we say we didn't use them? Because at the time, of course, there were strikes in Hollywood.
Yeah.
People were trying out generative AI things, but there's a pushback against them.
Absolutely.
Right?
And I think the funny thing is that when he was doing this film, most likely this wasn't happening yet. So I think when he was thinking about
development,
when he was still this was years ago. It was just after the COVID-19 restrictions. So I don't think it was such a hot topic at the time. And I'm so glad he did that. I'm so glad he... But yeah, if you go... I'll put the link on the video. There's this YouTube interview from MIT. It's a really geeky interview about AI. It's from MIT Tech, from the university, and they discuss this openly on that. It's the only video I've noticed about this, where they discuss openly that they had AI-generated Hans Zimmer music. I'm sure if this video would have come out now, it would have been really, really badly and damaging. But my hat to Gareth. He did an astonishing job, and I feel like the film is...
It is an astonishing film. Absolutely agree.
Yeah.
And Hugo, it's been awesome chatting to you about it. Thank you everyone for watching. Thanks everyone for making this film. We've really enjoyed talking about it. Once again, a big shout out to our sponsors, people watching us on YouTube, and also our Patreon supporters. We really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Time to go, Hugo.
Time to go.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.